Welcome to Going Green, podcast number 9. We're going to have a look at some of the headlines that aren't hitting the main news this week, but things that have come up in the blog as I've been going through the sort of latest literature that's going on. And of course there are some things that have hit the headlines, like the highest temperature in Lapland.
Yeah, yes, it is the highest temperature recorded since record began in Lapland, yes.
And we've had some highest temperatures in the sort of back end of Russia. We're also looking at Canada and around Vancouver way and sort of the northern United States having some of their, if not the record, but some of the very hottest days and unseasonably hottest days that they've had really ever.
Yeah, it's one of those things where they've been reporting they've been reporting the huge amount of deaths caused by the heat waves because, of course, it's so hot that people are not expecting the heat and then die of things like heat stroke and those sorts of things. But you wouldn't associate Canada nor Lapland, as in Russia, to be warm, or at least to be breaking record heat temperatures of a massive 20 degrees. You don't think that's sort of daft? It's sort of like, that's quite nice, and but you've got to remember these places they're cold generally all year round. The people are designed for cold. They wear all their gloves and scarves and jumpers. And they go out to a modest...
And that's the summer.
And that's the summer. And they go out in a modest 20 and realise that their woolies are, preventing them from cooling down. Therefore, unfortunately, that's how they get heat stroke and things.
Yeah. But we're looking at this village of Lytton in Canada. And not only did they sort of get, really hot... it's 49.6 Celsius, and the weather forecasts were talking about, will this world now be too hot for humans to live? Because dry heat of 49.6 is survivable. You can cope with that. But if it's wet heat, especially what we get in sunny England, we have liquid sun at the moment, don't we?
Yeah.
And this, if you've got a damp sort of heat, then that is really quite toxic to human life, and we don't survive well with that sort of temperature.
It's why we don't, I wouldn't say live at the equator, that's the wrong way, but, it's where the equator has got a different climate, is a different sort of environment to be and live in.
Yeah, you look at the houses that are in, some of the hottest countries in the world, and they're very different in design to the houses that are in sort of northern Canada, Lapland, wherever, because they're designed to try and keep as much heat in as possible. They've got triple glazing, everything to try and reduce the amount of
heat
air,
loss.
air that's moving around and heat loss. And if you're piling the heat in there, then people are sort of...
baking, essentially.
Yeah. And it's not really good for them, really.
Well, no. But it's such a... it's such a bizarre thing to even come across, but yet we're getting... they said not only was this the warmest century in decades, but they said it was sort of...
Hang on, the warmest century in decades?
Shut up. But they said, it's the warmest decade
in centuries. That's better. Yes.
There we go. They'll get it right eventually. But no, because of course everything's going up with the rise in temperatures of this, 1.5 degrees, and is that livable? And the answer is we don't know. We have yet to live in it.
Yeah. And in England, of course, we seem to be on the wrong side of the jet stream. So the jet stream sort of goes up over sort of Canada, it goes up over Russia, and it has a nice little dip when it gets to sunny England.
Sunny old England, yeah.
And so we have this white stuff covering us, cloud.
Well, I was going to say there's grey stuff, but yeah.
And yeah, quite a lot of grey stuff that seems to leak.
Sorry about that one.
Yeah, we seem to have not really a very good summer so far this year. It certainly hasn't been warm.
It's been alright. It's not been too bad, but it hasn't been hot,
Yeah.
if that makes any sense. Yeah. We're in summer, so therefore temperature is up. But of course it hasn't been baking or even, haven't had a few days to actually trap any heat in. We just had cloud cover that's basically been blocking the sun out to prevent the heat coming in.
Well, I know that for when I'm going out for a walk, I'm not bothering to have to wear a hat to try and keep the sun from... it seems to now burn the top of my head. I don't know why, because I still seem to have a really good covering of hair on there to try and protect it. But I haven't had to wear a hat much at all this summer.
No, and
Or sunglasses.
Well, that's the problem, you see. But, unfortunately, what we're looking at is this could be the new normal, if that makes any sense. As in, as we're getting hotter, the more heat waves we will be receiving. And unfortunately, unfortunately where we live in relation to the rest of the land masses, we live next to an ocean, so therefore we get all the cooling from that. But places like Canada and Russia, where they're huge land masses, they generate a lot of heat, and that affects the Gulf Stream. And there's got to be a ripple in the Gulf Stream somewhere.
Jet stream.
Gulf Stream.
Yeah.
They're both streams of something.
Yeah, water and air, yeah. But the jet stream is sort of amplified. It's going up more and down more.
Yeah, the what was it? I wouldn't say the modulation, but yeah, the amplitude of it is getting significantly longer.
Yeah, I'm not a meteorologist to sort of know, what it's really doing. I watch the weather forecast with great interest, and I can see what's happening with this jet stream, and I can see what's happening to the sort of temperatures. It's just they are so unusual, these temperatures, and the worry is, of course, they won't be so unusual. They'll become more common.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so we then look about let's look at the thinking logically. How do you stop a heat wave? Well, all right, let's build some ventilation to the houses. But you say, but the heat wave's only here for 3 weeks of the whole year, and the rest of the time it's cold. Oh, excuse me.
But in that 3 weeks is the 3 weeks you can die.
Yeah. Well, regardless of that, so it's a challenging thing to build, to get places ready that are resilient from both the cold and the heat at the same time, or be able to change and adapt between the two throughout the year. It's hard, and expensive.
So we're looking at improving, I suppose, in some of these houses in Canada and Lapland, then the ventilation. They're generally sealed as much as they can to try and keep the warm in.
Yeah.
And now they've got to try and sort of open them up, have the doors and windows open to try and get the sort of heat out, so it's sort of circulating more.
Yeah, and it's simple things like that is the crucial part of it. So it's going to take some time. We'll get there through. Now that it's happening, people will have to adapt to it.
Yeah. Now people are starting to understand that, this is happening. Could we have another year like this? And if we're going to have another year like this, what do we need to do? The people that are dead, they don't have to worry about it too much.
Unfortunately not.
But it is the number of deaths. And I read there were, in 5 days, 486 deaths in Canada that were sort of as a result, as far as they could tell, of this heat wave. And that's just people basically living in too high a temperature sort of deciding, well, they've got to go to bed, and they can open the window, but it doesn't seem to make an awful lot of difference because they haven't. You can open a window, but opening a window doesn't sort of make it cooler. You've got to have passage of air that can help to cool.
Yeah, you've actually got to have air moving, so that's why fans are actually so much better than opening just a simple window. It's because they're actually moving the air rather than just having it.
But if you're just pushing hot air around, that doesn't help either. The only way it does cool you is if you're slightly wet, which most of us are, and then you've got air moving over you. That will cool you.
Yeah.
By the evaporation.
Exactly. So it's one of those things where, I think people basically haven't adapted, and they've gotten used to the cold, and suddenly a heat wave comes in, they're not prepared for it. It's this being able to adapt and the resilience between the two they can have to get to.
There was one other thing that I noticed this week in the news, moving on to another subject, which was dear to your heart, which was from sunny Australia, where this beer manufacturer, craft beer manufacturer called Young Henry's, hit the news because they were cutting down all their CO2 emissions. And I read a couple of statistics, and I was quite horrified to think that, if you've got a 6-pack of beer, the amount of time it takes a tree to sort of absorb all that CO2 that was used in the manufacture of that was 2 days.
Yeah.
That's a lot of CO2.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, it's that's how what you're doing converting. You're taking sugar, which is a dense energy, and you're taking away and you're breaking it down into CO2.
And your favourite?
Oh, and you left over with beer. I know. I appreciate that. Yeah. But what I'm saying is, it's sugar's a big molecule, right? And you're then throwing away probably 80% of the carbon in it when you break it down.
No, I break the glucose down into 2, 3. It's a 6-carbon molecule. You're the chemist, and I break it down into 2, 3 carbon molecules, and then chop 1 carbon off each one, and so each glucose will give out 2 molecules of carbon dioxide. But that's still a lot of carbon dioxide.
It's a lot, yeah, absolutely. Anyway, so what this beer company do is they basically are pumping out. They've sealed their they've got a thing that's all the CO2, and they plumbed in their CO2 basically into a tank of water. And in this water it contains, I say algae, but they also are trying to grow they did try other experiments of trying to grow other plants, but the algae grew fantastically. And so basically now they're going, right, they can now grow algae using the CO2 from the fermentation process.
With a bit of sunshine.
With a tiny bit of sunshine. Yep. And so now they can, I say, 2 things. Firstly, they can claim that their beer is now CO2 neutral, because of course it's being used. But secondly, they can actually give out the oxygen equal to the amount of CO2 produced. So suddenly, let's say they dump a ton of CO2. Suddenly now they can turn that ton of CO2 into a ton of oxygen, which is, of course, we need to live and to use. So suddenly you go from bad greenhouse gas to good, clean, nice, friendly oxygen we require to live off.
So they're not just becoming carbon neutral, but they're actually sort of, we don't actually have a mark for oxygen producers.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, you've got to look what's coming out and see, if they store the carbon, then they could be carbon neutral. But so they've got you could do other things, but they decided to grow these plants, the algae, instead.
Do you know what they're going to do with the algae?
Well, I read, and I was in disbelief of what they said they were going to hopefully try to do with it. And Their answer is they're going to try to make more beer with the algae, which I'm not.
Algae beer.
Yeah, I'm not keen with it, But they want to try it. They can go for it. I'm not going to stop them.
Yeah, it does sound different. I know when we did the podcast on future foods, we were talking about people perhaps eating algae, but I still haven't really been sold on the idea of sort of eating this algae. I know I've got algae in my pond, and there's just no way I fancy sort of munching my way through any of that. But then there might be some animals that do actually like that, and if it becomes feedstock, then you're not making feedstock and using that. You're making this algae as a byproduct of beer making, and then you could sort of, as a byproduct of this, make more cattle, sheep.
Yeah, it's a way
Kangaroo.
to be not responsible in their production, because obviously we can't change fermentation.
No, we're stuck with that.
We're stuck with that. So, is there a way to take fermentation and instead of throwing things away, use what is given off as a byproduct to make something else?
But I can see that this is, this came out sort of a craft brewery is using algae here as big headlines, but there's a lot of other industries that make CO2, and if you could capture that CO2 and put that into these algae bins, then a lot of other industries could start to use this same system to sequester the carbon, fixing it, in algae as a food source.
Yeah, exactly. So it's taking the byproducts and actually making them useful things, but it's the looking at how to use byproduct, CO2 in this case, to do something. We're thinking, where's big places that do, could you do similar thing to concrete and basically have a large funnel over the concrete as it dries off?
Because that's giving off quite a lot.
That gives
CO2.
us a lot of CO2, and then pump that into suddenly these tanks and make some, algae from them. And therefore you're not changing the chemical reaction. You're not developing new technology. All you're doing is just collecting the thing and repurposing it for something else.
I suppose it's trying to persuade people that that's what they want to do. Now this technology is being shown to work, and I assume this is just done on a sort of a scale model stage, because it's a craft beer factory. They're not going to be talking about having enormous vats of this stuff.
No, they're probably talking, there's probably 1,000 litres, which is, I know it's a large amount, but not, not in the scale of sort of
Industry.
This is small, tiny batches for local people to try and do local stuff.
Otherwise, they'd be talking about sort of tons of CO2.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas they're only talking, massively sort of kilograms. Trying to sing.
And I know people have a lot of problem with understanding about sort of what is the sort of amount of gas, because a little bit of solid gives out an inordinate amount of gas.
Yeah.
I show my students a mole of sugar, and they go, it's not very much, is it? It's not going to take me long to eat that. Yet you start looking at the amount of CO2 you're going to produce from that, and you're looking at sort of a small room, and they don't believe the amount of CO2 that represents.
No, absolutely. And then following upon that, one of the critical things is, we're slowly developing technology to actually capture things like these gases. I just watched today from the Royal Society something about how do we actually go about capture gases, and they were talking about these metal organic frameworks, and they said
Zeolites, are they?
they are zeolite-like.
Yeah.
They are zeolites, but not zeolites are molecular frame rates, but they're rectangular. So yeah, right. So anyway, where was I? Yeah. So anyway, so they said a teaspoon of this zeolite, as you want to call it now,
Yeah. Metal framework.
metal organic framework, yeah, can contain approximately because we're in the football season, a football pitch area by a meter, so a meter high. So now we're in volume of gas. That's 1 tablespoon of this thing, which is immense, because obviously you've suddenly gone from that sort of critical thing of a cube of sugar to a football pitch of gas, and now we might be able to go from that, meter football pitch back down to that tablespoon of solid, which is quite a critical thing, you see.
Yeah, this is the relationship between gas
and solids.
Yeah. Sort of, I don't know what the multiplication factor is, but it's
The big one.
it certainly is a big one here that makes all the difference here. So it is a case of, I think this is a test of technology, and I suppose over the next few years we're going to start seeing this perhaps applied to other.
Yeah, because
places.
obviously it's one of those things where before they I wouldn't say there was no new science was done, because we know about the things, we know algae grows with CO2, we know that it produces CO2, so it's actually the innovation is to say, well, one requires it, one gives it out, surely we can just marry the two. Essentially, it's essentially supply and demand. One's supplying, one's demanding it, and they just marry the two up. It's a match made in,
The chemistry lab.
Yeah, exactly. So, but it is taking things that you may not put together. Things that have this counterintuitive supply and demand issue. As long as you can match what they're demanding, what they're supplying, then putting them together is not a big issue. And it's not as it's a bit more complicated trying to put them together. But is it really?
So are you suggesting perhaps a big energy producer, let's say like a power station, suddenly becomes in the future also a food producer, producing sort of tons of algae that can be turned and spun into some sort of food that I am prepared to eat?
Exactly, yeah. It's one of those things where without these small, I wouldn't say not leaps in knowledge, because that's the wrong way to put it, but these connections, thinking of odd ways to put things together, things might not change, and that's what I think we're requiring now.
So maybe algae is going to be the saviour of the CO2.
It might be the saviour, but I'll more grant it that it's the idea that's going to save us, rather than the algae itself.
So you like me are hoping that it's not going to be algae that's going to be doing all this. It's going to be some other food that we are prepared to eat.
Yeah, I'm hoping that the bypass the algae and go something like, let's grow something.
Raspberries would be my favourite. I'd put that down. The story goes this morning that Paul bought some raspberries and he showed me them, and then he wanted to have one, and
all gone.
Yeah,
I know, but yeah,
if we can do something like that, though, we can actually turn our CO2 into something that's edible, like raspberries, but it doesn't have to be raspberries. It can be any food particular. Then that's a really good use of that carbon dioxide, which is making energy, it's making beer, it's making metal, it's making anything.
Yeah, it's taking that idea that we can not marry two things, but use these byproducts which we're giving out, and actually making something from them. Use them, instead of making them byproducts, make them co-products.
And I imagine
not CO products.
Yes,
It's just co.
But I imagine that you'd also see the companies then, they should take it up because they're going to make a lot of money on this. If they're selling the carbon dioxide as food at the end, then they're selling that as well as selling what they were selling in the first place, the energy, the beer, whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Although there are quite a few people who argue that beer is food.
But it depends on, the consistency of the glass.
Yes. So that's one that's going on there that we've had a look. In the last few minutes, I'd like to just mention one of the other ones that I was reading about today. I was reading The Lancet, Planetary Health. Probably not the normal magazine that I would actually sit and read, but there was an article in there that they were big headlines, but reading the article, that it wasn't quite the same, but it said that global warming is increasing the risk of malaria and dengue fever, and they were talking about the number of people that were going to be now dying because of this. And that's really because of things like the summer is longer in these climates, so it's warmer, so we've got more insects, and they might have more insects for a month or 3 months, and that means that these vectors are then going to carry around more malaria, more dengue fever, and therefore, if it's the season's longer, more people are going to die from it.
Yeah, and that doesn't seem good. Which is why we need to work on keeping the planet cool. Because
I don't know, yeah, because I don't think you can stop easily the malaria. You can't stop the dengue fever. What you can stop is the seasons, and we stop the seasons by working on this global climate change.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and these if we can work on keeping the summers back down or where they were, is keeping make them more put the climate back to the meteorological seasons. Yes.
Then we might get somewhere. So although the story there was sort of one of these sensationalist sort of things, basically trying to get rid of these extra, vectors, the mosquitoes or whatever, they're going to breed longer and therefore carry more malaria. We've already got things in to check as many of the mosquitoes as we can, but if you've got more in the way of climate change, you might have more or less rain depending on where you are in the world, and that could either increase the number of insects or possibly decrease it.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't know.
So, but it's things to monitor, things to maintain it, but knowing that we're changing the natural balance, we're extending seasons and periods, means that these animals are adjusting to the new way, and some of it's not good, some of them bad,
Well, none of the stuff we talked about this session has been terribly good. Temperature rising in Canada, the beer in Sydney making algae, and seasons extending to give us more mosquitoes. Fortunately not in England. We don't seem to sort of produce an awful lot of mosquitoes, or at least deadly mosquitoes in England.
Yeah. It's one of those small things, one of those small mercies.
Well, that's it for this week's podcast, where we looked at some current topics. We'll see you again next week when we'll have a look at some more topics about going green. Until then, it's goodbye from me.
And a goodbye from him.
You got it right. Bye-bye.